It started with a whisper in trade circles. Then, a single headline broke across global news. 7 major countries, all key buyers of US agricultural goods, had decided to cut back, or in some cases, completely stop buying from the United States. And instead, they turned their eyes north, to Canada. It wasn't a slow shift. It was sudden, sharp, and shocking. Billions of dollars in contracts were pulled from American suppliers and poured straight into Canadian hands. For US farmers, it felt like the rug had been pulled from under their feet. For Canadian farmers, it felt like someone had opened the floodgates to a golden era. But how did this happen? How did the United States, the world's agricultural superpower, lose so many loyal customers in such a short time? And why did they choose Canada, of all places? The answer lies in tariffs, and the way they backfired. When the US government slapped high tariffs on certain imports, it expected other countries to fold under the pressure. But instead, those countries hit back. They placed their own tariffs on American goods, especially agricultural products. And when prices for US wheat, corn, soy, and meat suddenly shot up, they started looking for new suppliers. Canada, with its competitive prices, stable trade policies, and high-quality produce, was right there, ready to step in. So, which countries made the move? Let's count them down from number 7 to number 1. Number 7, Japan. Japan has been one of the most important agricultural customers for the US for decades. They buy massive amounts of wheat, corn, and beef every year. But when tariffs hit, prices rose, and Japan's trade officials started exploring other options. Enter Canada. With the Canada-Japan Economic Partnership already in place, Canadian wheat and beef entered Japanese markets with little to no extra cost. Canadian farmers suddenly found themselves shipping record amounts overseas. The Japanese market responded positively to Canada's high safety standards and consistent quality. In less than a year, Japan reduced its US wheat imports by double digits, shifting a huge portion to Canadian suppliers. This was more than just a financial change, it was a political signal. Japan was showing that if Washington wanted to play hardball with trade, Tokyo had no problem finding a new friend. Number 6, South Korea. South Korea has long relied on the US for grains and meat, but tariffs on steel and technology products triggered an unexpected counterpunch. Seoul introduced retaliatory tariffs on US agricultural exports, instantly making them more expensive for Korean importers. Canadian grain traders jumped at the opportunity. Within months, shipments of Canadian canola, soybeans, and pork to South Korea surged. Canadian pork in particular became a hit cheaper than US imports and praised for quality. South Korea's switch wasn't complete, but it was large enough to hurt US exporters. Billions that used to go to American farms were now flowing into Canadian agriculture instead. For Canada, this was a market expansion they could only dream of a few years earlier. Number 5, Germany. Germany is a massive buyer of agricultural products within the European Union. And for years, American soy and corn had a solid foothold there. But when the US ramped up tariffs on European cars and machinery, the EU fired back with targeted tariffs and agriculture was at the top of the list. Suddenly, US soybeans were no longer the bargain they used to be. Germany, committed to sustainable and affordable food sources, looked to Canada as an alternative. Canadian soy exports to Germany tripled in a short period. It wasn't just about price. Canada's image as a more climate-conscious producer resonated with European buyers. German media even ran stories praising Canadian farmers for their ethical practices, something that played well with public opinion. The US loss was Canada's gain, and it was a gain measured in hundreds of millions of dollars. Number 4, China. China is the elephant in the room when it comes to global trade. Its agricultural imports are massive, and losing even a fraction of that market is a devastating blow. For years, the US was one of China's top suppliers of soybeans, corn, and meat. But the trade war changed everything. Tariffs piled up on both sides, and Beijing began actively looking for alternatives. Canada seized the moment. Not only did Canadian exporters secure new contracts for soybeans and barley, but China also increased imports of Canadian seafood, beef, and pork. While political tensions between China and Canada have existed, Business is business, and the numbers don't lie. Billions in U.S. agricultural exports evaporated almost overnight, and much of that demand was soaked up by Canada. This wasn't just a backfire, it was a full-scale redirection of trade, one that might take years, if ever, for the U.S. to win back. Number 3. Mexico. Mexico is America's neighbor, ally, and until recently, one of its most reliable agricultural customers. But geography doesn't protect you from politics. When the U.S. imposed tariffs on Mexican steel and aluminum, Mexico wasted no time retaliating. Agricultural imports from the U.S., especially pork and certain fruits, became more expensive. Mexico turned to Canada for wheat, lentils, and even beef. The shift wasn't total, but it was enough to make a big dent in U.S. exports. Canadian wheat exports to Mexico rose by over 40% in a single year. And here's the kicker. Mexican officials publicly stated that Canada had become a preferred partner in several agricultural categories. For U.S. farmers, hearing your neighbor call someone else their preferred supplier was a bitter pill to swallow. Number 2. United Arab Emirates. The UAE is a smaller player compared to China or Japan, but its purchasing power is huge. They import vast amounts of high-quality food products, and their buyers are willing to pay top dollar. When U.S. prices shot up due to tariffs, UAE importers began signing deals with Canadian suppliers. Canadian beef, canola oil, and even maple products started appearing more often on UAE store shelves. Canadian exporters adapted quickly, customizing products for Middle Eastern tastes and halal standards. The result? Canadian market share in the UAE's agricultural sector skyrocketed. For the US, losing a wealthy, fast-growing market like the UAE stung badly. For Canada, it was a win that boosted both revenue and global brand recognition. Number 1. India. India's population is massive, and its demand for agricultural imports is equally enormous. Historically, the US had a strong position in selling almonds, apples, and certain pulses to India. But when the US imposed tariffs on Indian steel and manufactured goods, New Delhi hit back. They raised tariffs on US farm products, making them far less competitive. Canada stepped in with lentils, peas, and wheat, all in huge demand in India's growing food market. Within 2 years, Canada became India's top supplier for several of these crops. The shift wasn't just economic, it was strategic. India's trade ministry praised Canada's consistent and fair trade practices, sending a very public message about who they preferred doing business with. The pattern is now undeniably clear, and the irony is striking. The tariffs that were originally put in place with the intention of protecting U.S. industries ended up having the complete opposite effect on American agriculture. Instead of securing domestic jobs and markets, they effectively pushed some of America's biggest and most valuable agricultural customers directly into the arms of its northern neighbor, Canada. This was a consequence that few had predicted, and it has sent shockwaves through the agricultural heartland of the United States. For U.S. farmers, the impact has been nothing short of devastating. The sudden closure of major foreign markets led to billions of dollars in lost revenue, an amount that many individual farmers and agricultural cooperatives will never be able to recover. As orders from overseas vanished, crops that were planted and harvested with the expectation of being sold had nowhere to go. Grain elevators filled to capacity, warehouses overflowed with produce, and farmers were left with a massive surplus of crops. This glut of supply, with no demand, caused prices to plummet, making it difficult for farmers to even cover their operating costs. The future, once a source of stability and predictability, is now a landscape of growing uncertainty. Many farmers fear that the loss of these customers is not a temporary setback, but the beginning of a long-term decline that could force them to sell their land that in many cases has been in their families for generations. For Canadian farmers, however, the story has been the complete opposite. The void left by American exporters was a golden opportunity, and they were quick to seize it. Suddenly, Canadian agriculture found itself in an unprecedented position, enjoying record-breaking exports to countries that had traditionally relied on the U.S. for their food supply. This surge in demand allowed them to forge new, lucrative trade relationships that had previously been out of reach. The economic boost from these new markets is already having a transformative effect, reshaping rural communities across Canada. New jobs are being created, local businesses are thriving, and the future feels brighter and more secure than it has in years. For Canadian farmers, what was a crisis for their neighbors to the south became a powerful catalyst for growth.